Hi, I'm Tamara, and today I'm going to walk you through all of the steps that you need to know so that you can make these adorable throw pillows. Alright, so before we move into the tutorial, I would like to mention that I am using a free downloaded PDF for this pattern, and I will link to that down below. That pattern is not my pattern, it's a TULA pink pattern. I definitely would say that this is more of an intermediate sewing project, but if you're interested in getting into some more applique projects, this is a fantastic beginner's applique project. So I highly recommend giving this one a go. And once you've given this tutorial a go, you'll be able to see that you can really take any cartoon image that you can find online and you can turn this project into whatever image you wish. So I will walk you through, as simple as I can, the steps that I used to be able to adjust this pattern into something that you can really take with you and do whatever applique you wish onto a pillow. All right, so with all of that said, let's jump into this tutorial. All right, so after downloading TULA Pink's free pattern, then it will be time to cut out 4 pieces of fabric. You will need 2 pieces for the back and 2 pieces for the front of your pillow. You will also need to cut out 3 pieces of fusible fleece that you will have to attach to these fabric pieces, but do not attach them right away. Then take your 2 pieces of fabric that will be for your front of your pillow and sew them together at a 1/2 inch. Once you've sewn those 2 pieces together, then take it to your ironing board and give it a good press. I like to use this Mary Ellen's Best Press. So this next part, you will cut out each individual piece of the pattern and then take your double-sided fusible and lay all of these little paper pieces on top of that double-sided fusible and trace each section out. Once each piece has been traced out onto your double-sided fusible, of course, follow your double-sided fusible's instructions. But what I did was I ended up rough cutting all of these pieces out. I did not cut directly to the traced lines. And then I was able to iron all of this double-sided fusible to the correct pieces of fabric. And once that was done, then I cut out all of the fabric to the actual traced lines. So this is what they'll look like once you've cut them all out and they're attached to their double-sided fusible. Next, it will be time to attach all of these pieces onto the pillow itself. So the first thing that you'll do is you'll take your fabric and you'll actually peel off that back piece of paper. That way your double-sided fusible is exposed. And then you'll start laying it on top of your pillow. For this, I did like to use my ruler to make sure that I had everything exactly in the center, exactly where I wanted it. And then I made sure that everything was going to be overlapping where I wanted that to be overlapping as well. And what you'll end up doing is you'll start ironing these pieces on individually. So I'll lay a few of these pieces on, then I'll take it to the ironing board and I'll iron, or press, I should say, all of those pieces on. And then I'll move on to those next smaller pieces, and I will continue on down the line until all of the pieces have been ironed on. And once everything has been ironed on, it'll look something like this. And now it'll be time to take it to the sewing machine and sew around all of those outer edges. The only section that I actually did not sew around the actual edging was the circles, so the mirrors and the headlights, and I actually sewed little X's on them to hold them down, and I think that that's just fine. It was a lot easier for me to do that than actually sew a decent looking circle around such a tiny little headlight. And of course, don't forget to backstitch. All right, so I'm just going to interrupt myself here by saying what I did so that I was able to adjust this particular tutorial from this to this. And then I'll get back to finishing this tutorial. What I did was I actually took what I learned from this tutorial, which was essentially cutting out all those little pieces to create your applique, and realized that you can do this with whatever picture you can find, as long as the picture that you find is fairly simplistic. So first what I did was I researched the van that I wanted to turn into an applique, so I had an idea of what it looked like. Then I started to look online for images that were more cartoon based. So the image that I ended up finding and using was an image that is used for on t-shirts. So this particular clip art, essentially, I printed as large as I could on an 8x10 piece of paper, and then I copied that image about 5 times. That way I was able to cut out all the different pieces that I would need. So I cut out this large chunk here. I cut out the wheels that I actually copied from TULA Pink's pattern because I didn't like the wheels that came with the image that I found. And then I started to see what things could overlay onto each other and what things I didn't like. So there were vents right here in the van that I did actually cut out and I laid here, but it just made the image a little bit silly. I found that it really gave the van a French mustache look that I just didn't like. So I omitted that, but I did add little mirrors onto the image, which the image that I had found online didn't have. Things like the windows are pretty obvious, but this headlight here, I really wanted to showcase the fact that the headlight itself was pretty cool. So I ended up splitting it into 2 different pieces and 2 different fabric colors. So those are the things that you can think of when you're starting to create your own personal applique before you actually attach it onto your pillow. All right, let's finish the rest of this pillow. So now that all of our pieces have been sewn onto the front of our pillow, it's time to add some fusible fleece onto the back of all 3 pieces. So this front piece as well as our 2 back pieces to our pillow. Once all 3 pieces of our pillow have had that fusible fleece attached, then it's time to go back to that front section of our pillow again and just mark with a piece of painter's tape the center line. That way, when you sew across the very center, your needle will have a guide to follow, so you'll end up with a perfectly straight line. Now, one thing to note that I did do before doing all of these seams across, I actually lengthened my stitch length just a little bit to give it a bit of a top stitch look, and I found that that just made the pillow look that much prettier instead of having a really tight seam. And once that first seam is sewn, then just use that as your guide and place it beside your presser foot, and then you can go along and sew all the rest of those seams across, quilting your pillow top. Now, the 2 things that you see me using here but are not necessary to do this project would be my garden gloves. You can buy actual quilting gloves. They just have a little bit of grip in them, which I find quite helpful when moving the fabric on through the sewing machine. And second is the walking foot that I'm using, as it actually pulls the fabric through at the same rate on the top as the feed dogs do on the bottom. But again, those are 2 things I use that you do not need to have. And once you have finished the front of your pillow, it'll be time to do the same thing to the back. Now, I actually did my back pieces backwards. So I quilted them first, and then I folded and sewed this top hem here, which I'm doing right now. What I would suggest that you do is actually fold in and do this top hem first on both of your back pieces, because that will create your seam, your first seam, and then you can use that seam as your guide to finish quilting the back piece. That way, all of the seams have the exact same amount of space from each other. For myself, I ended up having this hemmed seam here closer to my quilted lines because I did this out of order. Okay, so now we are to a part where we are going to be putting this pillow together. I wanted to make one special note. As far as the backs go to the fronts, there is one thing you need to keep in mind. So I kept it in mind with this pillow, I did not with this pillow. So because the front of this particular pillow has a split design, and it's actually not split right in the center, which I really like, it means that your backing fabric should really line up with those seams. So when you're laying those pieces on the top of the fabric, just double check that they line up. That way you end up with a much more matched edge. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't even think this one is quite perfect, but the nice thing is then when it sits on a couch and you just end up seeing that edge, those lines match up nicely and it just isn't an interruption for the eye. Keeping that in mind, it's time to lay all 3 pieces of our quilted fabrics together. Make sure it's all right sides faced in. And then pay close attention to those 2 back pieces of fabric, making sure that once it's turned right side out, your top piece of the backing fabric will actually be laying over top of the bottom piece of fabric. And then once you've pinned that all together, just grab your quilting ruler and square up all of the edges. That way your pillow will be nice and square before you take it to your sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam around the entire outer edge. Of course, don't forget, you definitely need to do that back stitch. Next, you'll just snip away some of that excess fabric on all 4 corners of the pillow. Make sure, of course, not to snip over that outer seam that you just sewed. And then it's time to turn your pillow right side out. Once you've turned it right side out, just find a blunt end, something like the end of a pencil or a chopstick, something not too pointy so that you can point out those corners without actually pushing through the corners and ruining your project. And that, my friends, is everything that you need to know so that you can make your own applique pillows. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. As always, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss future tutorials on beginner sewing projects. I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll see you next time. Bye!